I mean, that's the main thing, is to go out and do the same thing with running. The hardest part is to just get out the door.
Hi, I'm Brilliant, your host for this show. I know that I'm incredibly blessed. As the son of self-made billionaires, I've seen the high price some people pay for success, and I've learned that money really can't buy happiness. But I've also had the good fortune to learn directly from many of the world's leading teachers. If you're ready to be, do, have, and give more, this podcast is for you. Nature is God. The key to life is contact. These words are carved into the table at the home of my guest today. His name is Bernd Heinrich. He is the author of more than 12 books and 100 scientific papers. The one that I asked him about in this interview is his most recent Racing the Clock, Running Across a Lifetime. Bernd holds many records as a runner. In 1983, while he was in his 40s, he set a record for the 24-hour run, running nearly 157 miles, 156.8. A runner of many talents, he ran a sub 2-minute half mile, which if you know about running, you know running a 4-minute mile is amazing. He ran half a mile in under half that time. He also, at one point, and still today holds records, but at one point he set the American national records for any age in ultramarathon distances of 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 100 miles, and as I've said, that distance in 24 hours, which is remarkable. And much of this later in his life. In this conversation, we cover many things, including having a plan versus enjoying life. We talk about love and its role in our lives and balancing it with accomplishment. We talk about finding our own path, figuring out who we are. We talk, of course, about running. We talk about aging. And then we talk, as we often do, also about writing. For many years, Bernd's work focused on comparative physiological ecology of insects, where he studied bumblebee behavior, he studied moths, he studied caterpillars very closely, and their ecology and their pollination. He later shifted to studying ravens and other birds. In fact, in this interview, you might be able to hear a woodpecker. I think it stopped for the most part as we got into the interview, but we could hear the woodpecker that lives right outside his cabin. In this interview, as I asked Bernd about running, as I asked him about writing, as I asked him about how we can live responsibly in a way that makes a difference for the future of our species and this planet, a theme that kept coming back was this one of just beginning. I love the way that Bernd says this. In running, as they say, the hardest and most important step is always the first one out the door. Everyone can do it, and it counts. For many years, Bernd has lived in a cabin in the woods in Maine, one that he built himself by hand. He lives without running water, phone service, or refrigerator, and he heats solely with wood and relies on a solar panel to power his laptop and his Wi-Fi router. He's just about to turn 82 years old, and he's still running about 4 miles a day. I find Bernd to be an inspiration, and if you don't know him already, I think you will too. So with that, I hope you enjoy this conversation with my friend, Bernd Heinrich. Bernd, welcome to the School for Good Living.
Thank you. Nice for being with you.
Will you tell me, please, what is life about?
Well, I don't know what it is, but, I can only talk for myself, what I think it might be. I'm sure it's different things for different people, but I think it's being part of life, being part of it, and participating in it, and getting enjoyment out of it, bringing others enjoyment, and having it being mutual, and trying to make a difference if you possibly can, for the better, and not take it too serious.
Yeah.
But I'm for me, I'm a biologist, and I'm really interested in life itself, to know as much as I possibly can about it, because I think in order to make any difference, you have to know, what's going on. You have to know the truth. You have to know what's going on, and before you can make the right decisions. So you don't act the opposite and do harm. And I think so. Knowledge, I think, is fairly important.
Yeah. Well, and as I know, so much of the knowledge you've gained has been firsthand, taught directly from nature, living in the woods and growing up first for the early years of your life, as I understand, in East Prussia?
West Prussia.
So I want to come back to that for a moment, but I do want to acknowledge we might have a guest in this interview, a woodpecker, just outside of where you are now. Will you tell me and people listening, where are you right now?
Well, I'm on a small mountain or hill in western Maine, in the mountains of western Maine. I'm in a beautiful part of the state. It's all forested, and I've been here since I was 11 years old in this area.
Wow.
So I'm really, I've been all over the place, Africa, whatnot, and Alaska, and all over the states, but I always come back here. So I'm in this cabin which I built while I was still in California. I was already thinking I'd come back here someday, and so now I am where I like to be.
Wow, that's beautiful. Bernd, I think you are truly living the dream. So many people who have a fantasy, so to speak, of escaping urban areas or suburban areas and having more direct contact with nature. And I understand that you might now be sitting at a table where there's many people have carved initials and even little sayings into, and that there's one in particular: nature is God. The key to life is contact. Do I have that right? And if so, what does that mean to you?
That's correct. Yeah, one of my first students carved it in there, and I can't even decipher the name now. I hope he's listening to this podcast, so I hope he hears it, because it's in the one corner of that table, and there the hundreds of signatures in there carved into the wood, and little pictures and saints, and this is one of my favorite ones, and I quoted it, I think, in Why We Run, or maybe Racing the Clock. I forgot which one.
Yeah, that's right. And this direct contact with nature is something that's been a part of your life, as I understand, from your very first day. Will you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what the conditions were, and maybe why you came to the United States and what life has been like since?
Wow, that's a long story.
And maybe you can tell that with the focus on your contact with nature, staying close to insects, of birds and caterpillars and so forth.
Right. Well, my family came from what's now Poland, and it was originally, West Prussia, and we were part of the big emigration at the end of the war, fleeing to the West, and we eventually made it, and that was a long trek with a lot of adventure, which if people are interested, they could read The Snoring Bird, where I talk about it. But it was, we ended up, in northern Germany, and we had no place to really go. My father had a contact there. They said, if you're ever in trouble, come over and stay with us. But there were so many refugees there; it was all filled up that there wasn't any room, and there was a forest nearby, and so my father is a wasp specialist, ichneumon wasps, and he and my mother, well, the first thing they did, went out there looking for wasps. and they found this little hut, a forester's cabin or something in the woods. And they talked with the forester and says, yeah, it's empty. You can stay there. So we ended up staying there in the forest for 6 years. Basically living off the land. Nobody had any official job or anything like that. We picked berries and trapped mice and ate them, and mushrooms and berries, and we had a couple of horses that we picked up on the way that we brought with us, and a wagon, all kind of what was running loose there, and we traded it to the farmer in town in the little village. And so my father was still totally in love with this wasps, and I was helping him collect the wasps, so I got to know insects pretty well. And he had colleagues in the States, not only from his wasps, but also from his expeditions to Sulawesi and Burma, for the American Museum and for the Berlin Museum. So, he had contacts as well, come to the States. And he wanted to publish his wasps. And he said, well, you could publish it here. And so that's why we came.
Wow.
But we were, fairly happy. We were, living in the woods, and I had a pet crow as a companion. And, I'd have sometime a jay and a pigeon. And, I was always out with him, setting traps in the woods and catching insects and looking for berries. So, I basically, my first memories are just, with living in the woods.
Wow. So I understand that there was a time not long after your family came to the United States that your parents continued to do work abroad and left you in school here with your sister, basically in a school where all the other students didn't have parents. It was a school for orphans, although you weren't orphans, and that you conducted a correspondence with your parents. Is that true? And if so, what was that like?
Yeah, well, they were in, they had a couple of expeditions to Africa, mostly to Angola in West Africa. And they would be there like years at a time. And so we were, and we at the school, when they did come home, maybe for Christmas once a year or something, we were not even allowed to leave because other kids couldn't do it. So why should we have that privilege? Anyway, it was, the Goodwill School is, and the founder was really into nature, really. We had a Ernest Thompson Seton fireplace, and so there was a good library, and the librarian helped me to find the books about Jack London up in the north, and then we had cabins in the woods, and I was becoming more and more bewildered in the woods, although we had to, be in the cottage and wash dishes and wash the floors, stuff like that. And so I was kind of chafing on that after a while. And I ran away with a couple of other kids, and we were going to go right exactly where I am right now.
Wow.
And we almost made it, but, we walked all the distance, like about 30 miles or so, but got sent right back. And so I got kicked out. So that I had the best year ever after I got kicked out, because my mother happened to be home then. They were going to go again, but she was home then. So I was back here, and I had friends and neighbors who were associated with these woods, and they were really tickled to have somebody who was really interested in the woods And so they kind of took me under their arms. So I had, like other sort of pseudo parents who were really, supportive of me being out in the woods, going fishing and deer hunting and stuff. We continued. I basically continued that same life that we had before, only much more so now.
Wow. Well, and I understand also just from having read your book, Racing the Clock, Running Across a Lifetime, which I'll just also interject here. I love this book. I was touched by it. I learned so much about different aspects of nature, about running, about life, about aging. So I hope that anyone listening, if any of those are interests at all of yours, that you'll pick this book up and enjoy it as much as I did. But from this book, one of the things that I took away, Bernd, is that you hadn't, even though you love nature and you had a home in it, and you had this family, the pseudo family on a farm that you were part of, that you hadn't necessarily found a way to distinguish yourself until you really began running, like as a competitive, or maybe not even necessarily competitive in the cross country. But will you talk about where and how did running come into your life?
Well, it started at the school there. I was probably one of the most near the nature ideal that they were actually thinking about, but they had people working who weren't, and so I was an outsider, and also I was writing in German to my parents in Africa. And my house mother said, called me a little Hun because I had a German heritage, and I was didn't get along with her, and so what was I going to say?
So somehow I think we were getting to how running was part of
running. Okay,
yep.
So that's right. So I went out for the cross country team, and the first year I did pretty well. I hadn't run, or actually I should mention one of the teachers had us read a book about Glenn Cunningham, who got burned, and he became a runner. And so that kind of got the idea, there was some value to running. And so I thought, well, I can run. So I was running, and became the mail boy and had to run back and forth between towns. So I was getting in shape, and pretty soon I was winning all the meets. And then I rehabilitated myself. The principal said, "Well, you are college material," and in the convocation in school, he says, Bernd Heinrich, he won 5 races in a row, and he's now an ace. And so I kept running, and I made it 10 in a row. And then said, "Well, you're college material. I said, "You got to be kidding." So I said, "Well, I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to be on the farm." But my mother then said, "Well, you better go to college. It's good for you." Well, I want to live in the woods. I don't know. I want to be a farmer, but so I'm glad she did. She insisted, and so I did go to college, and I found out, people were appreciative of what I knew. Like some of the professors, I could talk to them for the first time and get, people, they were really interested, what I was interested in. And so that got me started on being a biologist, taking what I had from experience and making it into science from there. And that led to, by a series of accidents almost, that I ended up being interested in basically exercise physiology of insects, how they could accomplish such amazing feats of physical prowess and I made discoveries in insect physiology that were just very inspiring, and so I just kept running. I seemed to be into that niche, and I was just running for the fun of it later on, and I just often had injuries, actually, which I thought would be lethal for running, and so I appreciated it all the more when I couldn't run. But then I came back and would end up being even better than I was before, because I appreciated it so much that I would put more into it. It was valuable, and it had always been.
Yeah.
And thus continued to be.
I understand that there was one injury that you had where you recognized what had happened and immediately went to the hospital and asked for surgery that day. Will you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I had run a couple of races and had ended up going as far as a marathon. And then I ran a small ultra race, a 50K, and I ran, right up near the front, near, somebody who held the American record for 100K. I said, heck, I haven't really trained for ultra. What if I really train? Maybe I could do it. And so I decided to really train for it. And I would be 41 years old at the time of the race. And so I started, and I was right here at this camp, right here in the woods that summer. And I was chopping down trees with an axe because I didn't yet know how to use a chainsaw. So I would be in the morning chopping down trees and then afternoon running. And I slipped and twisted my knee and broke a cartilage. And so after I had decided I was going to try for the American record at 100K, and I was really going to be committed to it, and here it was gone. So I said, well, maybe I can recover. So I immediately went to the doctor and says, do it now. I says, I want to get back out there. And they did. They did it, like, I think the next day.
Wow.
And 10 days later, I was out running again. I had a medial meniscus broken in one of my knees.
That's amazing. And you said that was at age 41.
Yeah.
And you did recover, and subsequent to that, and there's so much in this running career that I want to ask about. Yeah. But I actually want to go back for just a moment to something you mentioned. You talked about this term ACE, that I don't know if it was the principal or someone at the school who was in a position of leadership.
Yeah, it was the principal. Yeah. Principal Kelly. Yeah.
That term, right? And the reason, sorry, I was going to say the reason that stood out to me as a coach, as one who helps people achieve, results that are important to them, that helps people to be the person they want to be, to live the life they want to live. Anytime I hear an identity statement, I know there's a history there, there's a belief set, that kind of thing. But you even talk about this in your book, that this term, this title, ACE, was really important to you, right? And even it was, if I understand, it was the same principle that you had been in trouble with for maybe lighting something on fire or blowing something up. And then he changed his feeling about you once he viewed you as an ACE. Right. So will you talk about the trouble that you almost got in, and then the transition to this ACE, and how that label impacted you going forward? Just if that makes sense.
Well, as I said, I had run away, and that was a no-no, and put me kind of on the blacklist. And I hadn't any distinguishing characteristic showing at all. And I was also rather immature physically compared to others. I was, a very slow grower, I was skinny and small. And here were these guys, they were men, and I was I was just a little kid, even though, I was there 16, 17 or whatever. And so, I could compete with them. And so I could finally do something and be recognized. And it made all the difference. Like I said, like Kelly mentioned in ACE. And it went back to Miss Dunham, a teacher who we talked about Glenn Cunningham, who had an injury. He made a mistake too, even a worse one. He threw gasoline onto a fire. He thought it was water, and he burned him. And they told him he could never run again. Shit. Anyway, that touched me. That he could come back, and he became the best American miler at the time.
Yeah.
Or a great miler, anyways. And so, he really faced some huge handicap, and because of the handicap, he became, what he's known for. If it hadn't been for that, he probably wouldn't have valued the ability to run as something that to be proud of, and something to do, that it's worthwhile, you have a gift and you don't even know it. You didn't even know it until he tried it.
Yeah.
So that's what I saw.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And then, so you had this injury at 41, this torn meniscus. Yeah. And it was shortly before that you ran your first marathon, as I understand it, age 39, and you won. Yeah. Which is not a common thing, right? This is one of the things that I love so much about what you share, Bernd, is that I think our view as whatever Americans or the Western world is that basically aging, which, by the way, I didn't know this term senescence. So thank you for giving me some more vocabulary, right? This term of aging. I think we tend to have this view that you get old, you get decrepit, you get diseased, you lose function, and then life gets horrible when you die. But that's not at all what I think you're living, right? You're in your 80s now, as I understand. You're still running pretty much every day.
Yeah, my 82nd birthday is in a couple of days.
Wow. Congratulations on that. And this example that you live of being active, being healthy, being vigorous, making a contribution to others is one that I think is such a refreshing alternative to, we eat a junk diet, we live a sedentary life, we take a bunch of medications to manage pain or disability, and then we pass away and we get put in a casket or something. But that's not at all, what you've been living in. So I just want to go back to the running thing for a moment, because you've got this incredible spectrum. You've got this great range of you've run a sub 2-minute half mile, which is no small feat, but you also have incredible length where I understand, and I think you still hold the record, and maybe you can correct me, of having run 156.8 miles in 24 hours. Do I have that right?
24 hours. Yeah. Yeah. It was the American record, but I heard it's been beat now. I forgot who it is. I haven't kept track, but yeah, I had it. Yeah.
And as you tell that story in the book, you mentioned that your plan that day was just to run, was it 100-miler? But kind of spontaneously, you and your support partner said, well, why don't you just go for the 24-hour record? And you're like, okay, that's not common, right? But will you talk about how that unfolded and what it was like?
Well, I would have, I had, it was a 24-hour race. I didn't want to run the 24-hour. I wanted to run the 100 miles. I had set the record for 100K. I said, well, I can do it for 100 miles. And in the 24-hour race, I talked with the race director. He would time the laps, etc., so I could do it. I would, easily do the 100 miles. Not easily, but I could do it, and I could see if I'd get the record.
And how old were you?
But What's that?
And how old were you at this time?
I think around 45. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure. Yeah.
Okay.
But then we went to the race. It was in a Bowdoin College track in Brunswick, Maine. And it turned out when we went there, it was forecast, like 90 degrees, a really hot day. So I knew for sure, I couldn't, that would be too much handicap because, you'd be sweating too much and losing weight and you couldn't do it. So I said, well, if I run slower, then I wouldn't be losing that much water. And at night, heat wouldn't be a problem. So I'll compromise and speed up at night and go slow in the daytime or something like that. Anyways, I figured I wouldn't have to have such a wicked pace. And so switched over in order to take advantage of the night.
Wow. Okay. Let me ask you this. You talked just a moment ago about studying the exercise physiology of insects, right? What did you learn from studying insects that you were able to apply or to share with others in ways? I mean, I understand you made some pretty significant scientific breakthroughs.
Yeah, I mean, for insects, but, they don't, the thing is, energy expenditure, you can't, and speed, et cetera, contraction rate, and so the same problems, but of course the insects are going to solve them in different ways that we can't do it the same way. But I did, but like I say, overheating is one of the big problems for longer distances. In the sprint, of course, it doesn't matter, but if you go longer distance, you gather up heat and then you lose water and then you dehydrate. So all of the systems have to be, running perfectly if you're going to set some kind of a record. So it's just not the energy expenditure, it's energy input and the water output, et cetera, and the waste output. So these are the same problems that occur in insects, only in different ways. But, I remember there's some parallels that are kind of interesting. For example, looking at honeybees, I saw that they have a coil of their blood system in the pedule in between the thorax and the abdomen, which meant that if they were going to circulate fluid into the abdomen to get rid of the heat in the thorax where the muscles are, with the counter-current heat exchanger there, then they wouldn't be able to lose it. So they're small, so to maintain heat, they have to keep it as much as possible in the muscles. But it turns out that usually they have enough fluid because they're out there foraging for nectar, and so they're getting fluid, and they have it in the stomach, a dilute sugar solution, and which is basically water. But I found that if I heated them, they would regurgitate from the honey stomach and spread the fluid over their head and their thorax. So, in fact, I published a paper in Science on that after I found it out. And then I found out that Jack Fultz, who won the Boston Marathon on one of the hottest days ever, and he was a winner. And what he'd done was he had a squeeze bottle, and instead of getting liquid from the stomach that regurgitated on his head, he'd squeeze from the squeeze bottle, and he kept cooling himself, and he won the race. So, wow. There's a parallel, the same kind of problem and a different solution in a different way.
Yeah. And we're often, I think, not as intelligent as the insects or the animals around us. But in that case, that was pretty straightforward. That's cool. I think you had a time when someone took credit for your work and actually published a scientific paper that was really based on your discoveries. Will you, without naming any names or anything, will you just share what that experience was like? That you made a pretty profound discovery, and I think you were looking for a co-author, maybe, but then you found somebody who basically took work and published.
No, I wasn't looking for a co-author. I wanted expert advice. Okay. I says, I'm kind of new at this. And but I think I have a really great idea. I wonder if it's original. I wonder if it's worth publishing. But I didn't want to have somebody else take credit for it, especially since I was a total unknown.
Sure,
they would automatically get credit for it. So if I, if he or she put their name on it, because I was then a total unknown in science. I was a runner, so am I going to make a discovery? No. So, but anyway, so I gave the talk, and it was in a class, and there were a lot of students there, and everybody was really excited. And then the person, he came up to me afterwards and said he wanted to be co-author. And I said, no, I'm not interested. I wanted your views, if this is worthwhile, and apparently it is. And then I said, he asked, can you send me the paper, what you wrote? I said, sure. So I sent him the paper. And what he did was he rewrote it in his handwriting and sent it out to all the other experts who contacted him. Says, oh, you had a great idea. They're just exactly what I thought.
Wow.
So that's, that was an eye-opener. It just really blew me away.
Yeah. So what did you learn from that? Because on the one hand, as you're saying, it can be very valuable to socialize and share our ideas and get input and perspectives. And at the same time, being careful with what we have. So there's a balance there, of course, with people you trust or whatever, but what did you ultimately learn from that experience, or how did it change how you went forward from that point in your career?
Well, from that point, when I have something, I present, I publish it myself, but I also collaborate. I have good collaborations, but that is if we start at the beginning together. Like let's do this together. Here's this problem, let's solve it. But if one already has it solved, there's no point to have it be published with somebody else, just that they rewrite it, because most of the value is not in the writing, it's in the idea and the work that is done to get the data. So if you help get the data, that's totally different. Yeah. But if you don't provide any data, that's not it.
Right. Then it's not much science if there's no data. Right.
Yeah.
So
but,
when
so this was an exception. I mean, I have to say that just about all the other colleagues I had, we have the best relationships, and I get huge inspirations from my professors, and I just love them, and they helped me a lot. So I was totally taken aback in this case.
Yeah, understandably. Yeah. When you were first looking for a school or a place, maybe to land, so to speak, this was around the time that the DNA, breakthrough, the Crick and Watson, right? And people were enamored by that and focused on that. But you tell a story in the book about someone who maybe derisively used the word naturalist to describe you. Did you see yourself as a naturalist? And if so, what did that mean for you? And how is a naturalist different from a scientist, if it is?
Yeah. Well, naturalists would not be considered probably, molecular biologists. You have to deal with machines and complicated experiments, and a naturalist is someone who is more in direct contact with nature and sees problems. I felt myself to be a naturalist, but also a scientist in the sense that I see the problem and then I brought it into the lab and I do the experiments. And most of the neat problems the problems that are solved that I'm really proud of are the ones that I saw in the field and then brought in and did the experiments to prove it. Here, this is what it looks like, but let's try to disprove it first of all, and see if it really stands up. So actually, after I retired from the University of Vermont, I came up here, and I didn't have a lab, and I for a number of years, every year I would at least find something that I could get the data out in the field that didn't require machinery, lab equipment, and so on to do it. But I could make the observations and get the data. And I published one paper a year pretty much, and I published them in the Northeastern Naturalist because I want to give credit to this is where you really find what's newest by being out in the field, not in the lab, unless you're really into the DNA or something like that. So I call myself a naturalist because I go back. Everything that even the physiological stuff came from the field. So, I want to give value to that to be out there. I mean, rather than just theory. Yeah. I mean, I see something new every single day. Every single day there's something that could potentially be pursued, and that nobody would ever come up from a theoretical point. And if they did, they wouldn't know where to begin to get the data.
Yeah. Well, and that's all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning of the key to life is contact, right? Right there, being in direct contact. Yeah. Something else that I was really touched by in your book is this experience you shared about basically having, I don't know how you would call it, developed a sort of pain for one, maybe disability at some point in your career when you were pursuing a course of study. I think by this time you were at UCLA, and then you actually went home to Maine and you found a path, and these ailments that you were experiencing went away. Do I have that right? And if so, will you talk about that a little bit?
Okay. I was, I had started my master's degree, was in the lab actually with cells. It was cell biology, and my professor was James Cook, and we collaborated. He was the main, he basically had the problem, and he put me onto the problem. And, it was just a wonderful collaboration. And he said, I ought to go on with molecular biology because this was a hot thing at the time. Mm-hmm. And like I say, I went, he said, well, you ought to go to UCLA because he had gone there. So, but actually this was after, I'm getting a step ahead of me. I was doing respiration, metabolic expenditure of these cells. And they said, well, you ought to go to such and such a place and apply there for a PhD. I was doing a master's. So I went there and they asked me, why do you want to become a biologist? And I said, I remember when I was a kid, I was about 6 years old, and I was in the woods in Germany, and I came across this brook, and there was this big willow tree, and it was full of bloom, and there were birds there catching flies, and there were bumblebees on the flowers. And he jumped up. He says, "You're a naturalist," and so this was not respiratory physiology.
And this was not a compliment. Is that right? He didn't mean this.
It was not meant to be a compliment.
Yeah.
So I feel the opposite. I feel that is a compliment.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's where it came from.
Okay. And as you were following this course, basically suggested by someone else about the molecular biology, and you're trying to find your place in the problem and what your contribution can be, that ultimately it led to some maybe not so healthy outcomes for you, but then you made a shift and something happened.
Yeah. So I went to UCLA, and I was going to do, extra mitochondrial DNA, extra chromosomal DNA, like DNA from chloroplasts or DNA from mitochondria. These are potentially ancient symbionts that became parasites that are now part of our body. And it's very exciting stuff. And but the methods are extremely intricate and it dependent on huge machines and stuff. And I went into this lab to try to do it, and I didn't get anywhere. And in fact, I had, basically, I didn't know what the hell was going on for a year. And I totally, bombed out.
And I think at this point, it even impacted your ability to move physically, right? Like you had pain, run.
So, yeah, it was a whole year. And at the end, I think I was so stressed out that something, I was ill, but I couldn't find out what it was. I had, joint problems and pains, and I didn't know what they were, but I had, so that was another one of these injury problems that basically led to an appreciation of when you are healthy, what a gift it is. And like I say, I had changed my topic, and I started working with caterpillars, and then from the caterpillars to moths, and I was in my element and made discoveries, and then I recovered. So I think it might have something physical was involved there.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way, the way you describe it in the book, and to just point out that this love of caterpillars was something from very young age, and that you had made little cages with screens, and even, as I understand, still do to this day, that it's just been a passion and part of maybe who you are.
Yeah. So that was who I was, and I was being something else, trying to be something else. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's something very powerful in that for all of us, just finding what is true for us. What do we love? Where do we belong? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. Yeah. Okay. So the last few questions I have in this part of the interview, one thing that I want to ask, you make this statement there's a few things in here I found really fascinating. There's a sentence in your book. You say, one lesson I have learned is that life is a journey, and too careful planning of the road ahead can lead to a dead end and frustration. So what's your take on that, on like having a plan versus, just being on a journey?
Well, I think, there's so many opportunities that come up all the time. And if you're totally on a highway going 60 miles an hour, you're not going to see. And kind of wandering around and going slow, you see a lot more. I mean, for example, this morning, I was wondering why I hadn't seen the woodcock here. Every spring, there's a woodcock here that displays, and I know they catch worms that are coming out of the ground now. And we had robins here, and they all left. So what the heck was going on? Well, they both feed on angleworms. And so I says, well, I wonder if they are angleworms. So this morning, I spent about half an hour just raking leaves to see if there would be the angleworms under there that they should be. They should be pulling the leaves down into the ground. And I spent half an hour, and I found 4 angleworms. So if it took me that long, I mean, there's obviously they can't find any. So right now I have a problem right here. What happened to the angleworms? Why didn't I find any angleworms? It's totally unexpected. Now, if I was totally involved in some other project and I needed to get to the end and it might not be going that well anymore, I might still be stuck with it. But maybe this is more important. Maybe I should look at this a little bit more. So in other words, things are coming up all the time. And sometimes it's nice to have a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And the power of being present, being attentive.
Yeah.
Right. That's huge. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about was you share a story in the book about a time when I think you were part of an effort that was probably from the State Department of Forestry to spray for moths. Right. And I think they were spraying DDT. But and you can correct or add anything here that I might have wrong. But what I found so powerful was this idea that they were spraying to solve a problem that ultimately wasn't really a problem.
Yeah.
Will you talk about that?
Right. Yeah. Well, those are the gypsy moth. They will, defoliate, and so. They have these population outbreaks, and but they have natural controls normally. They're parasitic wasps, and they find the caterpillars lay an egg and they eat the inside, and then there are flies that do the same thing, and then there are birds that feed them, and then there are bacteria that get them, and there are viruses that get them. So once the population gets high, boom, then just like COVID, if lots of people have it and there are many together, it spreads like crazy. And so here, that's what happens normally in nature all the time, and then they get knocked down, boom, they all get killed. So they, unless they have some remedy, and these caterpillars usually don't. Anyway, so they were going to see if there were gypsy moths up there in northern Aroostook County, and I got a job just driving the roads and putting out little traps where they had a scent that attracts the males, and then they get stuck on glue, and then you'd know how many, if they were there. And if they were there, they were going to spray the hell out of it. But, tell you the truth, right here where I am right now, I've been here since 40 years, and I see egg masses of gypsy moths almost every year, and a few caterpillars. They're here all the time. but in very small amounts. So they're being controlled by, if you spray just because they're there, you would be spraying everywhere all the time.
Yeah. And then all the unfavorable consequences.
But if there's an outbreak, then the predators and the viruses and the bacteria, they will come in and they'll raise hell and get rid of them.
Yeah. And DDT, we've since learned, is really not a good thing to be introducing into the environment. But at the time, we didn't know that or even believed it was safe. But I was just, I was just really struck by this because I have this kind of theory as I go through life that very often we're trying to solve problems that either they're not really problems. It's just a perspective we have of something we don't like or something we think shouldn't be that way is A, and B, the solution is often worse than, it's kind of the cure is worse than the disease kind of thing. It's kind of remarkable.
Definitely. Yeah. So that's where, contact is required. If they had known that here was a place, where somebody had seen these moths every year, at least some of them for 2 decades, they'd probably think twice about, because they were assuming that once you get a few there, then they want to explode into a population explosion and have defoliation. But if you know what happens in other places, then you can have a better idea of what the mechanisms are. And nature has some pretty good solutions.
Yeah, no doubt.
If you keep your hands off, yeah.
Yeah, something else I'd love to hear you talk about that this was one that for me was a bit of a mind expander that you say, there is no absolute state of being alive. There are degrees of it, from that of the dividing yeast cells in our bread dough to the hummingbird. And I had never thought of that. You talk about frogs that freeze to the point of basically being dead, but then they come back and so forth. And that just resonated with me as a 44-year-old who by the mid-afternoon needs a longish nap, right? Of aliveness, this state of aliveness that some days, some moments I feel way more alive than others. But this idea that in biology and life itself, there are degrees of being alive. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, they found seeds in Egyptian tombs, for thousands of years. I mean, they were not living. They were dried up, and there was. So with seeds, you can kind of understand that you plant your garden, you got these dried peas and so on, and they're dried. They're not doing anything. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean. There are degrees. I mean, the bears who hibernate, they're more alive, but they're still not really doing much. And so there are, woodchucks and ground squirrels who are just barely breathing and having 1 heartbeat per minute or something. And so that's, is that really being alive? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was, for example, his name was Hinton. He was the editor of Insect Physiology, and he had on his desk a jar with midge larvae, some fly larvae from Africa. They normally dry up in pools. And there might be, 20 years before the rain come again. But in the meantime, they're just totally like dry chaff. And he could take them out and put them and get them wet, and immediately, they come alive. So you have instant insect. So the same with the frogs that I'm hearing right now, as a matter of fact, down there in the pond. They're frozen. And they were under the snow, and they certainly had no senses at all. And you would, it's hard to say whether you call them alive or dead.
Yeah. Well, and I realize here I'm maybe kind of attempting to bridge the scientific realm with the philosophical realm. but that insight about degrees of aliveness, because I tended to think it's binary. Like as a human being, you're either alive or you're dead. But clearly we all have energy, and we can see through glucose and metabolism and other things that we'd say, oh, I'm having low energy, I'm having high energy. And there is some correspondence, some correlation with the physical energy systems in our body. But it had never really occurred to me that in all of life, it's maybe not as black and white as I had thought it was. And then that's where the philosophical side is. What can we do to live with greater levels of aliveness, right? And I'm asking this, I guess, against the backdrop of a society that seems to have a lot of addiction, a lot of depression, a lot of disease, that is really not what I see as aliveness. So I don't know if you have a view on that, but how can we as individuals, even in maybe what could be considered a sick society, how can we live with greater levels of aliveness?
Yeah. Well, I think I totally agree with you that there are different levels of aliveness, and I think we want to live. Everyone wants to live at the highest or higher levels, and there are certain things that detract. We could potentially, maybe get a shot that knocks us out totally, and we can hibernate or something. But I don't think I'd want that.
Yeah,
I don't care if it lived 1,000 years that way. I would prefer, living 10 minutes than 1,000 years being knocked out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good thing to think about.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so I just have 3 last questions in this section. One, I want to ask you about roadkill. So I understand that and will you tell me about your relationship with roadkill?
Well, I mean, you could eat it, but, and I have, but not, I don't need to anymore, but I have. I used it to feed my ravens. So actually, when I was training for the 100K or the 24-hour, I had these long runs. I was always looking for roadkill because I had ravens and I needed to feed them. So, and then I started burying beetles, really interesting behavior. Bring the roadkill if it's small, and you watch them bury it and watch them transport. And I made another discovery there, how they can change themselves almost instantly in appearance from to look like a bumblebee, an amazing. So again, that was all a side show from roadkill, and I just published a little paper on maggots and how they dispose of a carcass and how they sometimes coordinate their own behavior. So all kinds of live things going on with these dead things. So the live ones, you get one mouse and you get 1,000 flies. So they're converting to other life. And so you see the cycling. So the animal isn't really dead. It becomes something else.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that leads to another thing I want to ask, which is you kind of close your book with this description of how you want your life to go, and being buried on the property there in Maine and so forth. I don't mean to be morose or take the conversation somewhere you don't want to go, but I really appreciate your view of life persisting. And I just want to ask you, what do you see? Like, how do you see the next stages of your life going? What do you want as it transitions?
Well, definitely, I think about the future, even, after my body's dead, it's going to be converted to other life. And that gives me some pleasure, I guess, in the sense that satisfaction that life continues, and it continues in other forms. I mean, how is it different from a caterpillar turning into a butterfly? How is it different? We don't think of that as an end. So why not, us, turning into plants that get turned into deer? So that's a conversion as well. And we don't think of it as an end. It's just the beginning of something else. And I don't have any. So I think for me, looking at it that way, the last thing I'd ever want is to be put into a casket and make it sterile and underground, and so nothing can get at it. I want to be converted to the rest of life. I want to join the party. I'll be continuous. I'll just be something else.
Yeah, that's a beautiful view, I think, and one very different from what many of us have who maybe fear death or don't see the interconnection of all things. And there was a passage in your book that I was really touched by, where you say, "I've seen my father sleeping with a bear cub, and my mother with her dearly loved monkey riding on her shoulder, have had crows, owls, wild geese, and ravens as companions, lived with a raccoon, a skunk, and several dogs. I've nurtured innumerable caterpillars to adulthood, and routinely fed chickadees from my hand. I'm an advocate of close interspecies associations through mutual, not just one-way interactions. Ingesting them is about as intimate as it gets, and I have eaten many mice and chickens, and would never pass up roadkill unless I had to. Eating other life is what every one of us does every day. I don't think I would mind being eaten myself." I just thought, what a wonderful, whole life view.
Well, I'd forgotten that I'd written that. Huh. Yeah. Well, I that's what I believe. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me ask you about that. Okay. So the last, I said I had 3, and I really have just 2. So in the book, you talk about love. You talk about, and I want to find this exact thing. It's not as long as that, so this is pretty short. But you do say toward the end of the book that you say, pardon me, you say, "Having now passed my 80th birthday, I'm no longer the runner or the scientist I once was, but I've had most of my dreams come true. Both roles had until recently captured my focus and my energies. I'm sorry that I was all too often unable to give more attention to relationships and friends. My new race in the last passage of my life is to learn to love more deeply." So I just want to ask you about that, about learning to love more deeply. What does that mean to you? How are you going about it? Why is that important to you? Just anything about learning to love more deeply.
It's being considerate. I mean, I think to think not from your own perspective, but what others might be thinking. To be a scientist, you often have to be so concentrated on something, on this problem, and there, it's total immersion, and that takes away. I mean, I had good relations, and they were lost because of that, especially since I spent like 10 years working on the tree swallows. I had to be out there, from the morning till night, be away from my partner, and that might feel like abandonment, and it in a way it was or is, but so it feels like a relief. I don't have to be out there 24 hours a day and see what that swallow is going to do. I can think about somebody else, and that is, I was loving the swallows or the ravens, and they took all my attention. So love is a matter of paying attention and being open to something else, rather than oneself, or maybe even something. Whether or not it's a swallow or a raven or whatever.
Yeah, thank you for that description. Okay, well, thank you for letting me go there. I know we've covered
for bringing it up. Yeah,
I know we've covered a lot in a very short amount of time, but I do just want to ask you if there's anything that we haven't touched on or anything that you want to talk about before we transition to the other parts of the interview. I'd love now's the time we can do that.
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay, good. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and transition then to the enlightening lightning round. How are you doing, by the way?
Good.
Good. Okay. All right. So this next one is, again, it's a series of questions. I think there's 9 questions here. That my aim, for the most part, is to ask the question and be quiet. You're welcome to answer as long as you want. I might pull on a response here or there, but my goal is to keep us moving. Okay. All right. So question number 1. Here I'm borrowing a line from Forrest Gump, right? Which is, I'm asking you to please complete the following sentence with something other than a box of chocolates. Life is like a
journey.
Okay. Question number 2. What's something you've changed your mind about in the last few years?
What is the most important?
Okay. Question number 3. If you were required every day for the rest of your life to wear a t-shirt with a slogan on it or a phrase or a saying or a quote or a quip, what would the shirt say?
Love nature.
Okay. Question number 4. What book other than one of your own have you gifted or recommended most often?
Other than what?
Other than one of your own.
Okay. Of Men and Marshes. I forgot the author at this point. I think it's Arrington. His love for growing up with marshes and nature. Of Men and Marshes. I think that's what it's called. It's sort of faintly in my mind because it was something that influenced me a lot when I was a kid. So I don't remember too much about it, but except that it was important.
Yeah, Of Men and Marshes by Paul Arrington, published in 1957. Does that sound right?
Oh my God, you got it.
Well, yeah, I just found it on, that's just the internet right there, the collective brain right there.
Gee.
Yep.
Wow.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Okay, question number 5. So in your life, you've traveled a lot, although you've been in Maine a lot too. What's one travel hack, meaning something you take with you when you travel or something you do to make your travel less painful or more enjoyable?
The camera.
Okay. Any particular kind and any specific way you use that camera?
Nope.
Okay.
I just have a little tiny camera. Got a digital. And I had one. My first camera was a little box camera, a square one, Kodak. And so I've had a camera ever since I saw things that I wanted to see again.
Wow. And you're sure to take it with you when you're going from here to there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right on. Okay. Question number 6. What's one thing you've started or stopped doing in order to live or age well?
I guess I'm aging well, but I can't remember anything that I changed, except I'm not running as much.
You still doing about 4 miles a day?
Yeah, something like that.
That's way more than most people run, right? Like, anyway, I just love that. I'm so inspired. Okay. Question number 7. What's one thing you wish every American knew?
That life is everlasting. Life is everlasting.
Yeah, me too. Beautiful. Okay. Question number 8. What's the most important or useful thing you've learned about making relationships work?
talking.
Any particular time or manner or topic when it comes to talking?
Being open to weird ideas or unexpected, and being tolerant.
Okay. Question number 9. So this one relates to money, and it's aside from the power of compound interest. What's the most important or useful thing you've ever learned about money?
Geez, I don't think I've learned anything about money. I'm still pondering it. It's not the answer. That's one thing I know. It's enough is enough. That's it.
Okay. Awesome. And then the last question here is, if people want to learn more from you, or if they want to connect with you, assuming you'd be okay if they did, what would you have them do?
You mean like from the audience?
Yeah, anybody listening. Of course, they could buy one of your books.
Yeah.
They could look on Wikipedia. They can search YouTube for some videos. I don't think you really have a website necessarily or social media presence.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to answer that question, because I don't really want to influence anyone, what they should do. I mean, it's whatever they feel like doing, and that feels appropriate to them. So I don't want to make any recommendations.
Okay, fair enough. That's fine. All right. So as an expression of gratitude to you, Bernd, one thing I've done is I've gone online to a micro lending site. It's actually started in San Francisco. It's an organization called kiva.org. And what they do is they disperse loans to women entrepreneurs in developing countries to help them grow their business and improve the quality of life for their family, their community, and themselves. So through kiva.org, I've loaned $100 to a woman in East Kenya named Elisivia, and she will use it to buy more seeds that she will then sell. So when that loan is repaid, by the way, I won't earn any interest. It'll go to facilitating more loans. So hopefully this is a virtuous cycle that we've been able to put a little momentum into just from the simple act of having a conversation. So thank you for giving me a reason to do that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the last part of the interview here is it's about writing. It's about creativity, habits, routines, mindsets, tools that can help us to complete our own writing projects, our own creative projects. And I just want to start with the question: when did you first know you were a writer?
That was, I know, I remember when I was still in high school, I thought about writing, how neat it would be to write a book. And I thought, and I know precisely what book it was. I wanted to be up in a tree and spend a year up in a tree and document everything that happens to that tree, in that tree, around that tree. And because I felt there's so much going on, and just focus on it, on a tree. But anyway, and then I know the next thought was, well, actually, most of what will be going on will be down in the roots, and I won't be able to know at all. I have no idea what's going on in the roots. So I said, that will probably be the most important part, and I'll miss the holes. And so I can't be a writer because I don't know enough. And then I did my first book, Bumblebee Economics, because I had all kinds of information now on bumblebees because all of the studies that I had done. And so, and I wrote it, and it was a hit. I mean, and it was touted by the New York Times, and it was my first book and it was, it was quoted, nominated as the best book in science or something like that. And holy shit. And I says, so I said, well, maybe I am a writer. And so I wrote, so then wrote a book about my owl and me. And so that's when it started, the first book.
Wow. You've also published more than 100 scientific papers. And my experience is it's somewhat rare for someone to publish meaningful scientific work or academic work and to write books that reach a large popular audience. And you've managed to do both. What I wonder is, what is your writing routine like, and how is it different, if it is, between the writing you do or you've done scientifically and the writing you've done that's more personal, like a book about you and an owl?
Yeah. Okay. The latter comes after I have a whole bunch of information. Usually it's basically always stuff that I already know about and I want to learn more about, and I want to get a better grasp of, because I figure if you write for a general audience, you have to have a broader perspective rather than just pinpointing. You have to have the context. And so like right now, I'm working on a book on beauty and nature. And so every once in a while, I have an idea and I write a few paragraphs and see where it goes and just see where it flows. And then I stick it in a pile and I don't force myself to say, oh, I have to keep going and going. So I write, what seems to come up. And a lot of times I think of things, like after I go to bed, suddenly I have an idea. And so I have a piece of paper there and a pen and I write it down. And if I don't, then the next morning I would have forgotten it. So I just gather bits and pieces, and then I, start to read and find new things. It goes in bits and pieces, and it gradually grows, branches like a tree, and after a while it takes root.
Wow, great description. What tools do you find to be helpful or maybe even indispensable in your writing? Do you write longhand? Do you have do you use Microsoft Word or something else? Is there a way that you organize your research in folders, either physical or digital? Basically, what tools do you use that help you to actually get your books done?
Yeah. Well, I have a folder, if I'm going to write about the northern forest or something, stick things in there as they come along. Yeah, that's about it. What's the question again?
So it's about what tools do you find?
Tools.
Yeah,
tools. I wish I could type. My only tool is basically, I don't have much of a tool except my pencil. And I wish I could type, but I'm only now starting. I had I pay someone to type for me. And I now, when they're really late and don't do it, so then I have to do it myself. And it's so painful because it's so slow. But now I'm gradually getting into the swing of it and starting to learn to type now in my old age. So,
wow.
I wish I could type better.
Yeah. By the way, are you using a MacBook? An Apple?
Yeah.
Yeah. That in Microsoft Word and some other applications, there's a really great speech to text feature where you can basically dictate to the computer.
Speech to text. Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
I've heard of that, but the thing is, I don't quite believe it yet. I can't quite believe that. But maybe it really is true. I know there's a lot of magic out there,
yeah, it's not perfect, but it is.
The thing is, I'd be mumbling all over the place, and
Yeah. Well, there's another feature that one of my interview guests told me about, that he will say one of the things he does when he writes is he will have someone read it aloud to him so he can hear it, not from his own being. But he said that sometimes when there's no one available, he'll actually have the computer read it aloud. So not only can you speak to it and it dictate, but you can also in another mode have it read it back to you. Yeah. It's just kind of cool. Yeah. So,
well, I am very computer incompetent, and I went kicking and screaming when they made us have a computer when I was at the University of Vermont. We had to get a computer. I just hated it. So I'm only starting to get used to it a little bit, but I'm still finding it's just, I don't understand it. There's too much going on, too many options, and
there's a lot.
Kind of scary to me.
There's a lot. Well, I'll tell you just from my view, I'm actually really encouraged by what you're saying, because if I can for myself know, or I can share with others with confidence that, hey, you don't need a fancy computer, you don't need sophisticated software. You can take a pencil and you can write your thoughts. And my friend Bernd in the woods in Maine has done this and published more than 12 books. And I think it's closer to 20 now. Is that right?
Yeah. They're all handwritten originally. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Several times, maybe. Yeah.
That's so great. Well, tell me, if you will, a bit about when you are writing a book. What is your routine like? Do you write in the morning? Are you a night owl? Do you write with coffee? Do you listen to music or just out in nature? Like, what is your routine like as a writer?
Yeah. With coffee, first thing in the morning.
Okay. So do you just wake up naturally? Do you have an alarm clock? You write with the sun? How does that all fold?
When I wake up, I don't. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. When you're writing, how connected do you feel to your reader? How aware are you of your audience in the act of actually writing?
Yeah. I think I am a lot. Yeah. I mean, I figure, I'm thinking, is this going to be too complicated, or is it going to be too simple, or, I don't have any particular reader in mind, but I definitely have this is going to be read and this is going to be interpreted. And so, I have to aim it to, I think of people that I know, if they were reading it. So I have, so I'm actually speaking to someone, real.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that can be helpful. What do you find is the most challenging part of the writing, of writing, and how do you face it? How do you overcome it when it happens?
Most challenging. I think it's mostly finding connections, because you have an overview and it I have all these papers, I think some good ideas. How is it connected? Is it connected? How is someone going to be interested in it? And what will they want to get out of it? What do I want to get out of it? What do I want to say? And where did it come from? So I think about things like that.
Mm. What is for you the most rewarding part? What's the most enjoyable part or rewarding part of writing?
Well, I mean, that was very rewarding to me, what you just said, about what I wrote, because I had forgotten it, and it sounds good to me now, and it, and that is very satisfying, because I don't have those thoughts all the time. They don't, they come up and they gather, but it's rewarding that it's saved, because it only went through there once. I mean, the background might be there, but it's not articulated, and until it's down, it doesn't really exist. So, it's a keeping, and having it spread like a tree growing branches and so on. It's life.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right. Well, with that, I think I'll just ask you what advice or encouragement would you leave anyone listening with who's either in the situation of being in what's sometimes called the messy middle of their own book or their own project, or it's a dream they've harbored for a long time, but they haven't really started on? What advice or encouragement do you say to anyone listening to help them get their own books done?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the advice is to just start. I mean, you just got to start, and not be afraid to think that it has to be perfect. I mean, it's just like building something. It just take one piece at a time and see what's attached, and not be afraid to do. I mean, that's the main thing, is to go out and do. The same thing with running. The hardest part is to just get out the door and just get it started.
Yeah, no doubt. I think I would be remiss if I didn't also ask, what have you learned from running that has served you well as a writer?
Just exactly that, what I just said, because, I think this is a good analogy. It's like running. You have to get out the door, and it's going to be a long ways, and keep at it. And every little bit counts. Some days are bad, you don't feel like it, and other days you suddenly flow. It's, don't expect miracles, but the, I look at a book and there's so many words, so many pages. How can you possibly? I mean, it's intimidating when you look at the whole thing. You just have to take it a little bit at a time, and keep adding. And that way, once you started, you automatically, when things come up that are related, then you find a place for them. But the main thing is to get something up there that you can attach to, and have the idea first. That's the main thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well, as a conversation here comes to a close, Bernd, one thing I also realized that I want to ask your perspective about that I haven't touched on yet is just about, as human beings living on a world that's full of environmental and ecological challenges, right? All of these we've created collectively, but any one of them is way too big for us individually to solve, whether it's climate change or deforestation or overfishing or this kind of thing. And I personally, and I know many people, I think, feel this way, that we're all screwed and there's nothing we can do, right? But obviously there is something we can do, because together we created this. But where I'm trying to go with this kind of poorly worded question is just, what's your view about what we should do, how we should live, what the hope is for us as a species or life and the earth, and so forth? What do you have anything to share? Any thoughts about that?
Well, I think contact with nature and knowing more about nature is necessary in order to have an appreciation for it, the feeling of connectedness to it and love for it. And then I think one would, automatically do things that take that into consideration. And I think the main problem is that, people who would be throwing, plastic all over the place or whatever, they don't know enough what they're actually doing, and that it has an effect, or they they don't have contact with enough nature to appreciate it. So, I put a bird feeder out here, and I'm enjoying watching the birds. It's not going to make any big difference, but it makes a little difference. And if a million people do it, then it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
So it starts small. The same with running. The first step out the door, you got to do that first step, and then usually other ones come after that, and they kind of come there by themselves. But the main thing is to start on something and be, conscious.
Yeah, well said. Thank you for that. Okay, well, Bernd, I know we spent a lot of time. I'm grateful to you for making time in your day to talk with me and everyone listening. As I mentioned, I really love this book, Racing the Clock, Running Across a Lifetime. I took a lot away from it. I shared passages with my wife on our last date night. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the School for Good Living podcast. Before you take off, I just want to extend an invitation to you. Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life still isn't working for many people. Whether it's here in the developed world where we deal with depression, anxiety, loneliness, addiction, divorce, unfulfilling jobs or relationships that don't work, or in the developing world where so many people still don't have access to basic things like clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or they live in conflict zones, there are a lot of people on this planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, or even if your life is working, but you have the sense that it could work better, consider signing up for the School for Good Living's transformational coaching program. It's something I've designed to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated, or you've gone through a divorce, or you've gotten married, headed into retirement, starting a business, been married for a long time, whatever. No matter where you are in life, this 9-month program will give you the opportunity to go deep in every area of your life, to explore life's big questions, to create answers for yourself in a community of other growth-minded individuals. And it can help you get clarity and be accountable to realize more of your unrealized potential. It can also help you find and maintain motivation. In short, it's designed to help you live with greater health, happiness, and meaning so that you can be, do, have, and give more. Visit goodliving.com to learn more or to sign up today.